Hi, everyone. Welcome to another TDC virtual salon, Ned and Brenda, Brenda and Ned. So let me tell you a little bit about them, but I just want to mention it first as well that you guys were originally scheduled as a live salon at the TDC. We scheduled it right before all the shutdowns, and unfortunately you weren't able to speak. So it's really great to have you here today. So Brenda and Ned are the founders of a design studio named Bread, B-R-E-D. I assume that's a mashup of your names. And they are authors, designers, printers, and collectors. They have been collaborating for 20 plus years, and their work has been recognized by various awards, publications, and institutions. In addition to their studio, Brenda is an assistant professor of graphic design in the art department at Pace University, NYC. And Ned is a senior faculty member within the graphic design program at Rutgers University, Newark, where he teaches design and design history courses. So let's begin just talking about where you are. Where are you guys right now?
Well, we are located right now in Newark, New Jersey, which is about 20 minutes outside of New York City. We're in a space that's called Express Newark. It's an artist space, and it's really, it really functions as a third space. It's a space between the university, Rutgers University, and the community. And so they have this new space that they call Express Newark that is developed to create a new social infrastructure centered around multiple art, education, and really cultural initiatives. And so this is where Ned and I house our personal collection of woodblock type, and it's where the two presses that we have a long history with are currently housed. And I think to kind of explain why we're in this space and how we even got to this space, it really starts with the two presses. They are two Universal 3 Vandercook presses. They used to be housed up in a room.
Bradley Hall on the other side of campus.
Yeah.
And we think they are from the Newark Star Ledger originally, but they were kind of collecting dust. And it was really Brenda and I that kind of found interest in letterpress. This is like 25 years ago. And we started to use them more and more.
And that started really our collection because we had, discovered these presses and we're teaching ourselves how to use these presses. We needed something to print on these presses. And this predates polymer plates, 3D printing, and all those great, advancements that have happened since. So we really just started scouring flea markets and estate sales and really anywhere we could to start to amass a collection of primarily woodblock type.
And if anybody's ever done that, you usually get incomplete fonts at flea markets and other places, rare bits and pieces. And that's really what our collection is. It's never really one font. And I think we have, in wood type, we have one or two. But it's really super eclectic, and it's from all over the place how we were collecting.
And you told me you're a really good negotiator, Ned, for price?
First, when they say it's $5, I'll pay them 10. So
yeah.
She does all the negotiating.
So our started early. We figured out where where our strengths lie, and his.
I run and say I want, and she tells me if it's okay or not.
So what are we looking at in front of you? What part of your collection is that?
So this is primarily from the book itself, and we'll get to the book in just a second, but this is probably a quarter or maybe an eighth of our total collection. And it's really, most of this is wood type, and most of this are wood blocks, line engravings and such. And some of these we had made for the book and we'll explain further, but to kind of illustrate some of the words in the book itself. Okay,
and so you're in this is the letterpress shop within this site called Express Newark. It's all part of the campus, is that right?
Yeah, it's a kind of a quasi space, a third space where it's community and Rutgers. There's a shared responsibility with that and leadership with that. And we're looking for opportunities to make, Rutgers in the past could be kind of isolated, and we wanted to kind of share through the arts with community, and there's a lot of fantastic things going on in Newark in the arts, and to bring that in and collaborate. We also use the shop for our classes and within our design curriculum.
And then Ned and I will utilize it for workshops that we do, through Bread or any work that we're producing through our own company as well, because it is a community space. So that's why it made sense to really house the collection here.
Yeah.
And to really keep it with the presses, because these presses, we refurbished them about 10 years ago, just the two of us through, during the summer. And so they really are, we have a long history with them, and they're pretty special to us. So
I guess if we didn't house them here, we'd be sleeping on them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big collection, and we just, we live in a small New York apartment, so
Yeah.
that wasn't a possibility.
That's right. That's an interesting point. You actually live in Manhattan. This is out in Newark, so you've always got a commute involved. It's not next door.
Yeah, which works great for me because I like the separation of home and work, which has been tough during the pandemic for sure.
And it was
You guys just only recently got back in there, right?
just
Really
2 days
for
ago,
this.
right?
Yeah.
So it is nice to really be back in the space, and just to kind of be back with the presses and the blocks. It's a little eerie because no one's around, but.
And you were saying that you're seeing the work that you left kind of just in place.
Dusted, light dust on it and right in place. And we kind of left in a rush, like I'm assuming most people did. But we had like 24 hours notice, and I had my last class, and we were out of here.
Wow. Uh-huh. So why don't you introduce this project for us, and then you have a presentation we'll look at. And I just want to remind people, I forgot to mention, for anyone who's listening who has questions, please put them in the Q&A panel, not the chat panel. It's just easier to see them that way. So so we're going to talk about this book you designed and printed there. What started it all?
The impending birth of our son is really the beginnings of this project. We have been growing this collection, like we mentioned, for 20 plus years. We had used it in various projects over the years, but never anything really substantial and large scale. And so I think our dream had always been, let's come up with a project in which we can really, implement this collection. And with the impending birth of Drew, I think the nerves were getting a little high, and so
rumor has it I'm a little a nervous mini. So
we figure we'd put that nervous energy to work, and that's really when the sketching process and sort of initial planning of the book started. And so Drew's just turned 7, so that's talking 7-8 years ago. But I think at that point, it was still very much like this dream, like, yeah, maybe we'll do this, but we knew the scope and the scale, how big this was and what the commitment would be. So I think in the back of our heads, there was always this fear that it would never really happen.
The joke was Drew will get this book when he's 25. I mean,
Yeah.
and I said that a lot, thinking there's no way we'll ever be able to do this. But with the presses here, it kind of gave us the initiative to take advantage of it. And that's, the idea of actually implementing the collection. And it felt like a really solid task at that point before Drew was born that we could do. Really naive, because it obviously it went until about 2 years ago, I think is when we finished it. So it took a long time, a very long time, and from sketches to implementing. But
Express North was a key component of it, right? This provided the space that we really did need to pull a project of this scale off. We really needed that room to work. So it really was these things coming together. It also was Drew was coming to an age where he was starting to learn how to read, and he was starting to question things, and we were reading a lot of children's books, and we were kind of analyzing them. And there's a lot of beautiful books on the market, and then there's a lot of ones where you're like, how is this printed, so that started the conversation. We really started to think, God, we really should do this, and
I think we're fortunate that we can do that we can marriage, life and work together. It's a rare opportunity.
Yeah. But the idea that he could be part of the process, I think, was a kind of a pushing component for us, you know, that we could do it with him at that age.
Right.
So.
Right. Even though you had started sketching before he was born.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think the you know,
Rumor has it I was a little nervous.
But I think the parameters, defining those parameters and stuff, really started to come into play when we were kind of going through that learning experience with him on how this child learned how to read, you know, and that kind of helped us define what this design should and can be.
And to be fair, you know, there were times when we wouldn't touch it for 3 months and then come back to it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, why don't we take a look at what you've got about the process of making this book, and you're going to share your screen.
Yeah, and hopefully I'll do this without any problems. All right. Excuse me for 1 second. Almost there. All right. So hopefully you're seeing the book.
Yeah, great.
All right. So for those that are not familiar with the project, what we're going to talk about today is really taking you through the process and story behind the development of this book, which is Drew's ABCs. It's a limited edition, completely letterpressed book of 360. Every component of this book was handcrafted, from the print process to the production process and binding. And so just to give you a little glimpse before we start really talking about it, show a couple of the spreads, and then we'll come back and revisit the book once we go through this process. So like I mentioned, the 2 Vandercook presses were what we utilized for this. The 2 presses that we work on are Universal 3s. One is a standard and the other has an adjustable bed. And again, they live here at Express Newark. And so the making of Drew's ABCs, so if you want to jump, I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
So like we mentioned, this started really before the birth of Drew. You know, we went through this sketch process. We started kind of mapping out what it is we thought this could be.
Because, you know, with letterpress, if you print one side of the sheet and then you try to print the other side of the sheet, it'll be affected by the earlier print and the indentation. And so we tried to create a system of French fold or 4-corner fold so that the pagination and or the color worked and the images worked well. And so that was kind of a little sub problem that we had to figure out at the very beginning. And on the slide in the lower left, it kind of shows that the beginning, the right side of a page is actually the beginning of the next left side of the page. So that, and we were talking about binding as well, and these sketches kind of, you know, try to figure that out, visualize that.
And so this was really the beginnings kind of planning. Before we even got into the design of the book, we were just thinking about structure and thinking about how really this would function. And before we could start the actual design, we really had to look at the collection in totality and see what do we have. I mean, we had been collecting this for so long, you know, we really had to go back in and revisit. So
I enlisted 2 graphic design students to help me print everything. And then Brenda and I scanned those in, broke those up, and put them in the folders well before. I mean, we had some idea of the sketch, you know, from the sketches, what the pages would look like. But it wasn't really until we had the digitized versions of the like this shows that we were able to kind of dig into the implementation of the design.
And we knew that we had, you know, some image blocks, but, you know, most of the collection really had been focused on woodblock type. So we had to really start thinking about, all right, we're going to need images. What do we do here? And it was really important to the 2 of us that we had complete control over this process and we owned everything that was part of the book. So that meant going through, you know, we have a box of just sort of imagery that we've been collecting that is royalty-free images from, you know, old encyclopedias and dictionaries and just photos. And we started kind of rummaging through all those and pulling out images that we thought were interesting, and then relied on royalty-free images that we would find to kind of help supplement some of those needs, and then had blocks made of those images. So there's quite an investment on our end.
Well, you go back when you told me, for instance, that you got that photograph of the kids with the football at the old flea market on 23rd Street.
Yeah, which was a great flea market, and it's sad that, I mean, I think it's a shell of what it once was.
Yeah.
But yeah, they sell these boxes of just old photographs, and half of them are worthless, and others you find little gems. And this was a series of outtakes of, it looked like obviously it was from the 50s. It was two little boys playing, or it looks like an ad for a sports store or something.
And it's actually part of another collection we have. We have a huge collection of old photographs like that, are just kind of found that we've collected just because they're beautiful chance compositions.
And I'm sure most designers kind of have their collections of resources and stuff. Yeah.
The other part within the process was, this being a book of alphabets, we were, looking at the influences of
Lester Beale, Bradbury Thompson, Mondrian, Kurt Schwitters,
Dr. Seuss.
Dr. Seuss.
And so we started, going through every letter of the alphabet and kind of making a listing of all different words that start with those particular letters, and then piecing them together to create these kind of nonsensical sentences.
Yeah, and truth be told, I'm not a very strong writer, but it felt like a little puzzle that we could figure out. So each sentence on each spread is entirely done with that particular letter form. Mm-hmm. So the B, the C, the D, each one of them, the entire sentence reiterates that over and over and over again.
And the elements that are printed in color would relate to images of those words on those particular spreads. So that helped us really kind of edit out and figure out what is that image list we needed, what do we need to make, what do we need to do. So this was yet another one of those kind of sub problems before we got into the full design. And then type, which was kind of an interesting story, and I'll let Ned.
Yeah, so the parameters of that kind of, it kind of forced us to make some decisions. I didn't have the resources to go out and buy, a font can be quite expensive. But we had we had Palatino Italic at 14 point. And the modernist in me wanted to use Accidents Grotesque. It's one of my favorite. And so we found a size and a maker in Germany that could actually produce a full font for us, which was a story for another time, but really, really interesting. He didn't speak English. I don't speak German, and he had to borrow the matrices from the Leipzig Museum. But it was really kind of a fun process of ordering a font in lead type, and it's coming from Germany. But so we got the Accidents Grotesque 12 point, and that paired up with what we could kind of digitally design on a computer using Palatino Italic and Accidents Grotesque.
Yeah, and thank God for Google Translate. So, so just to explain kind of the function of the book. So like we said, that sentence kind of establishes the structure, the images that relate to the words that are in red. And then we had additional kind of sight words for, a young child, the young reader to kind of practice again within that particular letter form. And that's really how each page within the book functions. Colors, again, knowing that this was the scale and scope of what we were trying to pull off, we decided to work within the Pantone system to avoid having to really mix ink on press, and it gave us, we felt, better control over consistency.
Red, yellow, blue kind of makes sense. We had a silver in there and we had a black as well. Mm-hmm. But I think that choice was kind of obvious and maybe cliche, but I think it works really well.
And even with kind of being planning ahead and thinking the Pantone system, we still had to do some custom mixing with the yellow because we weren't quite satisfied with the quality of the yellow, I guess.
It came out really, really dark, so we needed to lighten it.
Yeah, so we did our best to avoid mixing custom inks, but still had a little bit of tweaking to do. But the design of the book and how we worked in tandem in the design was working through InDesign. Like we had cataloged and digitized the entire collection. And then we created folders for each letter of the alphabet, and Ned and I would kind of work back and forth and sort of define these parameters as we went back and forth.
Sometimes the images would overlap, sometimes they'd be in contrast to each other. If we sensed that we didn't have the contrast that we wanted, we'd either have to go back and make the letter form, order the image. So it was, you know, for the most part, I'd say we had like 80% of what we needed. And then there was kind of this reevaluation in the process. Oh, we need something. Like in the lower left-hand corner, that G was something that we had to order.
Yeah, same with the draft.
Yeah, the draft.
Right, so, but the larger kind of Clarendon-esque G, H, that's one of the rare fonts that we did have a complete font of. You know, so that you'll see that quite a bit throughout the book as kind of that large element. The only part of the entire book that was commercially printed was the grid.
A blue line grid so that we knew where the images would go, because it was our hope to work in turn, print one side, flip it over, print the other.
And then have nice registration that way.
Yeah, we'd get 2 up on each sheet.
But this was actually one of the areas where it was actually quite difficult working with a commercial printer. We tried to explain we needed these margins to be exact. And after 3 separate print runs, we still had to learn to live with an imperfection within that grid.
Long story short, we had to live with it. And really the only crucial thing is the small text type and its alignment. All the other elements could shift and we could get away with it. But the text type was very difficult.
Do you think that says something about commercial printing?
I think there's,
yes.
Well, yes, and I think there's also kind of an insanity of what we were asking. It was sort of an abnormal.
Well, but I think you would agree, you know, you go back 15 years and that wouldn't have been an issue. Of course it would have been done perfectly. Now I just think what commercial printers are asked to do, that kind of detail maybe is lost. I'm wrong on that. I hope there's no printers on the.
Yeah, we're gonna get a lot of angry emails now, so. So this is a illustration of essentially what the setup was, you know, us thinking through how this would work. So you have this, you know, 2 up on a sheet. We were going to be printing, we had 400 sheets per spread, knowing that there'll be some loss in the process.
So we started with 400, ended up with 366.
Yeah. And so here's an actuality of, you know, one of those printed spreads. So the illustrator kind of rendering and then what it actually would look like once printed. So tell me I forget, teach me I may remember, involve me and I learn is just a wonderful quote. When we had kind of worked out, we had the design worked out, we knew how we wanted this to be. You know, there was some talk when we had a digital comp made up, speaking with publishers and kind of talking about possibly commercially producing the book. To us, that was never really an area of interest. We always wanted to do
it the hard way.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, it was part of this challenge of, can we do this? And we had talked about it for so long. We had kind of talked ourselves into a position where we must do this, you know, otherwise it's a failure. And I think we wanted that pressure, but we knew we couldn't do this just the 2 of us. Just the manual labor alone was just, we'd still be printing. So we opened it up to students, looking at it as an educational opportunity. This was a way to kind of engross them in the process and really use it as a teaching tool and achieve our goal. So the first day that we had opened up, we had a meeting. We had 24 students. We had students from Pace University, where I teach, and students from Rutgers, where Ned is. And these 24 students met with us, and we kind of tried to be really stern in that first meeting and explain the, you know, seriousness of what we were being asked, you know, asking them to commit to. And we gave them, said, listen, take some time, think about it, and get back to us if this is something that you're interested in. And when the students left, we kind of looked at each other and thought, okay, we might have about 4 people we can work with, but we're going to be doing the bulk.
Or they would just, you know, they disappear, hide in the shadows, and that was the last of the conversation.
But
in reality,
24.
all 24 stuck with it, which was amazing.
Yeah.
Some did it for credit, some did it volunteer-wise, which was remarkable. But all throughout the process, we just assumed we'd start losing people, and we never did. And that was probably the most gratifying portion of the entire project. The conversations we had about design, why we did certain things a certain way, why we designed things with contrast. Just those conversations, those intuitive conversations that came up, it was amazing. It brings me to tears.
And you know, we started with smaller tasks because we were aware that some of these students had been exposed to the process. This is their very first introduction. And for us, the time and the investment in this was so great, like we couldn't sacrifice the quality not being where it needed to be. So it was a little nerve-wracking at first because we had to build this trust.
This is a mock-up of the text type within the chase, and we used the chases in the same position so that we would print the black and for this instance, print the red. And that kind of precision, I think, set the tone for the students and implementing the other designs, because everything else was, like I said, fairly easy.
And so we had to teach them, how do you set type? And they had to understand spacing, and they had to understand, you know, these really detailed elements. You know, it takes a lot of concentration. And then this would be the very first thing you print. So we'd have these blank sheets, and you'd have, you know, on one press, this was done in tandem. On one press, you have the chase lock up with the black type, and on the other, you'd have whatever that color was for that spread. And you're working in tandem to make sure things are registering. And as you can see, you know, it's not this perfect registration. And that's something where we had to kind of compromise amongst ourselves, or how much forgiveness are we willing to accept, you know, and how much do we give over?
And probably the most important thing was the baseline, like in this case, America with the rest of the line, just making sure that baseline was consistent.
Yeah, and this was where most people shied away from wanting to help on this component, because when you're looking at a blank sheet with a thin line of small text type, it's really hard to trust your eye that that is straight and that everything's right. So
that's when I disappeared.
Exactly. And it takes a very diligent, you know, timing of measuring. And you have to be really kind of detail oriented on this particular component. One of the other things we recognized was the setup, the lockup on, you know, the press bed. That was a very time consuming thing because you have a very eclectic lockup. So we devised a system where we would print out, and it's hard to see from this image, but we had a pica grid, and then the type would be mirrored on that pica grid, and we'd print these sheets out and lay them on the press bed, and that worked as like a template so students knew where to place things and then lock things up. And we found that process really
saved us hours.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of like take it apart, put it down, put the things in, and then find the furniture. The furniture wedges the typography in there. Here's an example.
Yeah.
But that was tremendously helpful.
And then our lockup, you know, here's one of the examples of what one of those lockups would have looked like.
And you said you had different, you'd have different approaches to locking up stuff?
The only way collaborations like this work is if you're just different enough. For me, I think of it like a game of Tetris, and I like the perfect kind of beautiful matchup.
Needless to say, this is Brenda's
That's
lockup.
A lockup.
It wouldn't be mine would be cockeyed, and but it would work, but it would just be a complete mess.
Yeah, his induced anxiety in me, but but if they work, they work. I just think it's better to work in a more organized way, because if you have to make an adjustment, it's a much easier adjustment. But we see things differently there. It's okay. We still got through it. So showing kind of the build of the sheets. So again, running the two presses were always in tandem. So this is really exhibiting two separate runs through the two presses. So 3 separate runs?
Yeah, because
right?
the black text, the red text, and then the black R's and R's and images. So really, even though it's only 2 colors, it's actually 3 runs through the press, because we were concerned about the registration of the type. And then the 4th and the 5th. And then and we would probably have one more, and that would be the silver as well.
Yeah. So, you know, again, working with the students, you know.
It got to the point towards the end of the process that they really could take on projects or sub-problems, and we could kind of look elsewhere to, to finish other parts of the book. I could go in the other room and trust the students that it would be done and it would be done right. And they really had an eye for detail, which was amazing.
Yeah, and it's one of the other things that we had discussed, that really, you don't know what to expect when you open up a project like this and you bring in 24 different people working on it. That's a lot of hands in a process that already has a lot of kind of room for error. But we were shocked with how efficient the system became. Their students kind of naturally gravitated towards components that they really liked and where they were really strong, and these natural teams started to kind of develop. We'd have people that were, really great at lockup, people that were great with the consistency of color and pressure, someone that would keep an eye on the printed sheets and keep making sure that those colors aren't, deviating, because you do become blind to that kind of saturation of color after a while. And so your first print and your 50th can be very different.
And I used to joke with the students, whatever came off the press, I loved. It's like, oh, this is awesome. And it's like, I would forget myself of what we needed to do in the exactness.
Yeah, so it was just, at some point it broke, and it was no longer teachers, students, it was just this huge team of collaborators, and that was just priceless. There's really no words to explain. So once everything was printed and dried,
we had to cut the sheets down to the spreads themselves. And this just shows the collation process with our son, Drew, in and out.
And through this process, this is where we were kind of pulling sheets if something had an error in it, or we didn't feel the quality of the print was good. This is where we were kind of making those choices and those decisions. And then this is where we really realized what that total edition was. We were able to kind of see what that loss was.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, early on, we were naive about how big this was. And 400 was, I wouldn't call it a mistake, but that was a really large number. Maybe we should have thought about that more.
We had students kind of helping us on this production end as well. So folding books, binding. So it was really a team effort throughout the entire process. But again, there's so many great conversations and learning experiences happening through this process. And then, again, being in this community space afforded us the space that we needed for storing all these books, and really kind of allowing the room for this total process of not just printing, but production.
A buddy of mine gave me some cabinets that I could store them in, thank God.
Yeah. So I'll take you through the book now, just to kind of show the completed book. And just because it wasn't enough, we embossed on the inside covers too. Learn to see and see to learn, which is a wonderful phrase that was coined by a dear friend of ours and someone who's very influential in the book as well, Pamela Horn at the Cooper Hewitt.
So I think you can see how scale and color kind of play off each other. And that's why I kind of mention Mondrian quite often.
Yeah, and really the only structure, again, in the book is that, small text type providing that. And that's why it was so essential that it hit in the exact spot on each spread. The other, elements, there's definitely more room for forgiveness. And there's a second emboss of the big eye.
And we numbered each book.
Yeah. So when you do a project of this scale, it's anyone who knows Ned and myself knows it's fair to say neither one of us will ever be a contender in a spelling bee. And so our phobia was always that there was going to be a typo in the book. And so one of Ned's colleagues,
Fran Barkowski was reading this. It was all done. She was just kind of looking it over, and she's like, "I think underwear is spelled wrong."
Yeah.
I'm like,
our hearts sunk, and so we immediately, went, because we were obsessive about spell checking. But it turns out the word underwear is misspelled so often that there's an acceptable misspell of underwear.
or at least that's what we want to believe.
So we really kind of panicked, and the thought at this point with the physical and mental exhaustion of reprinting a spread was just really overwhelming. I mean, it really took us a good week to kind of get our head around.
We were setting up to print again, and I was setting up with Aya, thank God for Aya, and she said, well, why don't we just print over it? And we're like, yeah,
so this,
why don't we just print over it? Like, what am I thinking?
This U right here actually masks the underwear. And now that we have some separation from it, I can find the humor in the fact that of all the words we could have misspelt, we misspelt underwear, and the solution is to cover the underwear. So it works. So if you have a book and you look at the U on this spread, you can actually see when you kind of tilt the book, you'll be able to discover the underwear beneath. So that was our one glaring error. Because these students were so amazing, and words can never express
Beyond
this
amazing.
team of 24. Ned and I felt it was absolutely essential that we give back to them in some way. The design of this book had been us, and they were really, you know, without their production help, it would have never came to life. So we wanted to give back in a way where they had some meaningful purpose within the design of this book. So we opened up the collection. Each student chose a letter of the alphabet, and they worked within a system that was designed to complement the book. And each poster has a phrase that says, "Don't mind the imperfections. It's what makes us unique." And then Ned and I became kind of the production help with those individual students. And these posters act as a book wrap for the book, so they live with the book. So it's an individual design piece that the students are responsible for, but it complements and works in tandem with the book. And we just felt that, you know, even though it added on a whole nother level.
Yeah, we're not finished with that. And some of them have graduated.
We're still printing. There's 24 students, so it's a lot of printing. But it was such an important thing for us to be able to give back and have them be a part of it. And this is some of the students, not all.
Not all.
I really, we don't have a photo of all.
No.
We're gonna have to have a reunion once the pandemic is under control, and get a photo of the complete team. So the book is available at the Cooper Hewitt in the design shop. It's also available at McNally Jackson on Prince Street in Manhattan. And obviously it's available through our personal website, which is www.breadnation.com. And he was our youngest intern and youngest printer, and he did print some. And last, I just wanted to say a really quick thank you. Really, it's too many students to mention. Their names are all up here on screen. Without them, again, none of this comes to life. So grateful. Want to thank Gloria Kundrup from the Art Center in Los Angeles. She wrote the introduction for the book, which really helped provide the context for the work.
Just to kind of explain that it was letterpressed and what that means, and she did a fantastic job. With really great.
And then, like I mentioned before, Pamela Horn at the Cooper Hewitt, she was a very early on collaborator with us, kind of talking through what this book can be and should be, and just sort of helping us sort of have an objective person to talk about the process with.
And there's many others, but it's kind of hard to name them all.
And obviously, thank you to Doug and Carol for allowing us this platform to even share this. So.
We have some questions. Can I bring those up right now?
Sure.
Okay. So one is from Doug. He's asking, how were the cuts made from the flea market photos?
We use a company called Oswaso Graphics.
I don't know if any of you have used them. They're fantastic. I think it's roughly about, I want to say 70 cents per square inch. So for instance, something like this might cost $15, maybe $20 with shipping, but they do it by the square inch. But anything you can do in InDesign, Illustrator, and Photoshop, you can get made into a magnesium line cut.
Type high plate, yeah.
Most of the photographs I actually turn into bitmaps because I kind of bitmap the quality rather than into circles.
Okay, next question from Thomas. Did you use particular grid to arrange these beautiful, complex layouts digitally, or did you judge more free form?
Well, the main grid is really that one line of text type, right? And it's kind of creating this T grid, right?
Yeah, and it kind of creates a hang line for both spreads. And then I think he answered it.
It is
As things come in, they begin to work with space, and things either get smaller or larger. But what's different about this process is these are a set size that we can't change.
Right.
So either the image works or it doesn't at that size. So that was kind of, that's what I meant. It was kind of give and take. We would rewrite the sentences if we didn't have the images. So it's a little bit of both.
So, but let me add to that question then. So you never change the scale of things in InDesign.
No.
You can't, because they represent
the images we made, some of them we would, yeah.
You know,
Okay.
that can't be changed. Our images could, and we did that later in the process when we got good. But I think there were 2 or 3 that once we got working with them, we realized, God, that needs to be bigger. So we'd go back and reorder them or smaller.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
I'm obsessed with this idea of balancing with color and size.
Yeah, and some of them are antique blocks, and those were what they were, and so color played a role in that too, right? So some colors are more recessive, some are more aggressive. So, that kind of helped too with planning out what is that color flow with the book. So.
Right.
All right, then Dina wants to know, absolutely love this project. Is there something you do differently? Failures you share along the way?
There's tons. How much time do we
It was too big.
What's
It's too big. It caused a lot of stress for both of us
Yeah.
and our students. But I wouldn't take any of that back. But it was a really big project. I think we were naive about it.
Yeah, I mean, if I just one thing, and just because it's in front of me, the gesture, right? We controlled this. We designed this gesture and kind of how it breaks and builds. And it's it was 2 layers and it had to register and like stuff like that, because the registration ended up being kind of a nightmare.
Yeah, his stockings are red, so they have to register over. It's very, very difficult.
And so it's like, why did we design it that way? So there's things like that you do it, and when you're in it, you're like, oh my God, I should have done that differently.
And a good friend of mine, Paul Sternberger, said, well, why didn't you do a children's number book?
Yeah, 1 to 10.
1 to 10. That-
You would have made it 1 to 50.
yeah.
All right, one more question from Samar. Were there any ligatures in the book?
No.
Hammer.
Sammer.
We
Oh.
know Sammer.
Okay, that's for book number 2.
I don't think so. I don't think any
No,
ligatures
no, there
whatsoever.
weren't any, no.
Okay, well, that's it. Thank you, everybody.
There's a question in the chat. Is the book available in the UK to buy?
Well, you can buy it through our website, and we can mail it to
And
the
we'll
UK.
ship it to the UK, yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then I have some questions. I know when we've just talked about this whole project together, you have some ideas about its value educationally in what it teaches about design to do something by hand like this. Would you like to say anything in general about that?
Yeah.
So the students that worked on this just graduated, and I humbly believe that that's one of the best classes we ever had. And I think those students that worked on the book saw design differently had they not worked on it. I think their attention to detail, their ability to take on tasks and have ownership of them, I mean, it was remarkable. I think it they leapfrogged in a way beyond where you would expect them to be. And in turn, I think they kind of upped the ante for their colleagues, their students, their cohorts. And it just, that bond and that interaction and that constant discussion about scale and form and color and composition, it was remarkable. And I don't know if it's achievable, in every project you do, but especially in this one, like we said, maybe it was a mistake, it was so big, but I wouldn't trade it educationally. I think the students were just remarkable, and they learned so much about design.
Yeah, and for me, the students that I have at Pace, you know, there's an established design program here at Rutgers. At Pace, you know, it's just beginning, it's in its infancy. And so the students that I was able to work with for Pace, that exposure of one, design community, you know, working together in that collaborative way was a very unique experience for them. And then two, you know, just learning the terminology that they've heard me reference, but had no real connection to. And then when you're in the process, it's like, oh, that's what that means. Okay, now I get, you know, so kind of having that experience and going through that design process, I think was just absolutely priceless. And it really helped me gain the confidence of really kind of pushing more for these immersive learning experiences within Pace and taking next steps to make that happen at Pace.
And I don't think you can underestimate the physicality of the process and what that means to a student. Most of, you know, what their experience is Command P, or it's, you know, goes up on a website or it goes up digitally. The physicality of this just made them look at design in a very different way.
Yeah, it's interesting. In art departments in universities, the physicality remains. People are still making paintings and prints, but it's kind of disappeared in the design departments. It seems like letterpress shops are a way to bring that back to design departments.
I think across the country, they're succeeding because of that. They're an alternative too. I mean, I've had the opportunity to visit letterpress studios we were talking about earlier, and I actually think they're more valuable than they've been in 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
All right, great. There's one more question now from Robert. How did you determine what paper to use to print on?
Oh, that's a good question. We went with, it's a Mohawk, and that was really from research too, right? We're looking back at kind of historic letterpress printed books. And
it's a matte finished coated paper from Mohawk.
I'm blanking.
I'm blanking too. It's a beautiful, sorry Mohawk. It's a beautiful paper in that it prints really well because it is coated, but you don't get the shine. I've never been a big fan of glossy paper.
Right.
It's a 100-pound text, so it's substantial enough that you can print on it, but it doesn't bleed through, and you can fold it fairly easily. So we went through a series of papers, testing them and getting samples and stuff, but the Mohawk was by far the best.
that just really held the color really nice, and it just sat so beautifully on the paper. So
What's next? Do you have any big projects in mind?
small projects.
Small projects.
Very small. Yeah, there's always, with the two of us, there's always multiple things happening at the same time, you know, and then something kind of takes the hierarchy, and right now the stamps are kind of coming to the forefront. But yeah, we do have a few different things kind of jumping around.
We're doing stamps. I talked to you guys about this the other day. We did a 50th anniversary of the Apollo landing.
Of the what?
The Apollo landing.
11, yeah.
Anniversary. But you know, the edition is like 80, and it's 8.5 by 11, and it's manageable. And again, it's like, you know, trying to find a creative outlet in a manageable, so we don't go crazy kind of environment. And the stamps seem to do that for us. We've been asked to work on a series of projects using stamps as the implementation.
Great. You know, we have a few minutes. Do you want to pick up the laptop and show us more of the studio?
Can you untape it? Nervous energy decided to tape everything down in the studio this morning.
So can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But we only see your camera on, the movable.
On this, put it on that one. Can we do that? Or should we just take this one around? Yeah. And this one's not tethered. All right. So we're going to walk around this one. Okay.
So first of all, we have these big walls, and they're covered with these portions of 1980s billboards, which kind of gives it a typographic look and feel that we kind of like. All these here, all this type was donated by the Newark Public Library, and it's kind of on a quasi loan to us. We have wood type and we have lead type. And this kind of quadrupled our lead type inventory. And then the presses, this is one, this is the non-adjustable. And then over here, under blankets, is the adjustable. And the advantage of the adjustable is a lot of this type isn't at the same height, either because it was manufactured differently or it was, you know, just destroyed a little bit or beat up a little bit. And so
also, we have type that's from Europe, we have type that's from Asia, we have, you know, American type. So there's obviously different measurements. So the adjustable allows us to be, you know, experiment with those different types. We
And-
have our collection is over here.
we have flat doors, obviously, dry and wrap. And this is the lead type that we had with a small startup grant. We ordered the Accidents Grotesque in 3 different weights and 3 different sizes, which is a really nice teaching tool. We do a project that's kind of like a weather report project. Dan Friedman's weather report, if you guys know about it. It just teaches hierarchy. And then, yeah, this is all the craziness of our images. And
It's kind of a bit of a mess because we did leave so abruptly. Normally the shop's a little more organized than it currently is. But we also have, you know, the extended collection of woodblock type that we have is, you know, in all these different drawers. So again,
Yeah,
pretty
and-
eclectic.
I have more up at my office on the other side of campus. It's just,
Some at
it
home.
became an obsession to collect, partly because I think if we don't collect it, it'll be thrown out or used as a display in somebody's house. They break up fonts all the time, and it's kind of a shame. So whenever I see type or whenever we see type, we tend to gravitate and buy it.
Yeah, we tried to wean ourselves off the addiction, but we're still buying, so. But I think the collection here is pretty expansive, so I think now anything moving forward, I'm just gonna start housing down at Pace to kind of start a new collection for that location. So we can get both spaces going.
I don't know if this,
Can you hear me? Yeah, someone is asking, Elliot is asking, was there anything in particular that inspired you to start your collection?
Yes, I think these 2 presses, we wanted to use them, we wanted to play with them, we wanted to figure it out. I don't know, I can't explain why we became enamored with them.
I think that's more of the practical answer, and I think she's absolutely right. But if you've ever been to a flea market and you run
Yeah.
across a large letter form in the grain of the wood, they are beautiful, beautiful objects. And, you know, I mean, just a kind of an example, this cue came from, we got this in Dublin, you know, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful object. And the thought that this can print and print well, and it might be 100 years old is just kind of interesting, cool to me.
And there's always, it's the hunt too, to find them, you know, and not knowing what you'll discover and what you will come across. And it's getting harder now because people are aware of letterpress and everything's online, so it's harder to find them in the wild. Continue to, so that's part of our fun of travel. Even Drew knows, our son knows to look once we go into like antique shops and stuff. He knows what to scour for. We have him trained, and he's cuter than me. You get a better price. So.
Yeah, and you get
I wanted-
polymer as well. Maybe your audience knows about polymer plates. They're thin little stickers that you can print. That's very easy, very affordable. I'm not a letterpress purist, but I just really like the objects in the block. So when we decided to get images made, we made sure that they were blocks and that we could kind of keep it all the same.
Right.
There's people that get a little finicky about polymer plates. Is it not traditional? It's not authentic.
Gloria is actually on. She's watching this, and she wanted to say that she's asking, actually, was a mohawk superfine?
Thank you.
Was that it? Was
That
that,
That's the Gloria Kundrum. She's watching from the Art Center.
You overheard.
Yes,
It's a
thank you.
beautiful, it's for us, for me, for us, it's just a beautiful page, type of quality to print on. Really
Right.
beautiful.
And then we have another question. Do you do studio visits?
Yes, and when the pandemic is up or over, we are looking for people to come in, and we have developed a more user-friendly, quick kind of workshop idea where we use modular wood, and you can kind of print something, pull that off, put other images in. It's very, very quick. And we've done that for the Cooper Hewitt Museum. They had a retreat here. We did it out at the University of Arizona. Yeah. We've done it for Prudential. And I want to do a lot more of that. So if anybody's interested, and really these are kind of free workshops. We want people to visit the shop and get their hands dirty.
Yeah, and for us, I mean, we're always thinking about it in terms of obviously our own studio work, but we're also thinking about it because we are both educators. How can we translate these ideas? How can we translate these processes? How can we make this more useful? And so we want people to work with us so we can constantly be testing these ideas. You know, the modular workshop system that we developed really derives from this and kind of some of our frustrations with the time it took for lockups. So, okay, if we're going to use this in a teaching way, you have usually a 3-hour window of an average studio class. How can you use that time more efficiently and still get something out of it?
With 12 students, like
Yeah.
some students are kind of hanging out because they can't get access. But with the modular system, you can get 12, 15 students with a 4-color poster by the end of 3 hours.
Yeah.
And it's on collage, but still it introduces the process, and then you get people to come back and visit again and do more substantial projects.
I think that answers another question we had about whether or not you have any specific projects planned to get students back on the presses in the future.
We're always thinking about that.
I was teaching an advanced letterpress class right in the middle of last semester, so we kind of completely went a different direction. But we're working with a group of letterpress educators, and they're calling it a provisional press.
Provisional press.
These smaller laser cut portable presses, which I think is a brilliant idea. And you know, we'll have these 2 presses, but ultimately with these portable presses, we'll have 10 additional. And so there will be no standing around. And so for the fall, we're going to actually try to give these presses to our students, and they'll be printing off campus and then sharing the process with the instructors and stuff.
Wow, that sounds great. Well, we're at the end of our time. Can you believe it's been an hour? We've had a couple more comments from people just saying hello from Brazil, great job, things like that. So I would say to anyone, if you have more questions for Brenda and Ned, look them up online and
Reach out.
Yes, please do. We'd love to hear from you.
So, you guys, you're standing now. You can take a bow if you want. But thanks so much.
Please give the jazz finger.
Thanks so much. I'm glad we got a chance also to see your studio a little bit here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Great, and good luck getting back into the studio and with your students.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Okay, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.